give you a brief overview because within the limited time we have, it is a brief overview. We will follow the following process. What is a tender? And 2, evaluate the contract risk. 3, tender process and documentation. 4, evaluate and review completed tender documentation. 5, obtain tender approval or endorsement. And 6, submission of tender. So it's going through the, so this is what we're looking at briefly from, now understand that we're going to have different perspectives if you're a small builder, if you're a subcontractor, right through to if you're a large builder. The systems are different, even though the process might be the same. I can tell you from my own experience, when I was working for large commercial builders, we had a whole team of estimators and estimating managers. So there was a very complicated process. However, when I was starting on my own and tendering, I was the sole person doing the tendering, doing the project management, doing the supervision. So different situations for different people and different structures of company. But the process is the same, okay? So let's have a look at basically what is tendering. So it's the process of making an offer or a bid or a proposal to do some work, or expressing interest in a response to an invitation or request for tender. So we have somebody who is interested in creating a project and we're being asked to tender on that, okay? Now, obviously there is a few different ways of getting involved in a tender. There's an open tender, which means that anybody can price the job. Anyone who is capable or believes they are capable can actually tender on a project. And then there is a selective tender, where a select number of contractors are given the opportunity to price a project. And then the best form is a negotiated tender. Negotiated means that the client is going to negotiate with you as the sole contractor to do the work, okay? Now, that is obviously the best way because you're guaranteed to do the work. An open tender is the hardest way because you are highly unlikely to do the work because there may be too many people competing on the bid. And generally, when you have too many people pricing a job, the one who's likely to get it is the one who makes the most mistakes, unfortunately. Okay, so that's generally, in essence, what tendering is. So what is the process of tendering? Well, we have the preparation of the tender. So in other words, we have a situation where the client has prepared all the tender documents and they are made available to you as the contractor to review them and create a price based on that documentation. So it involves evaluating, from your perspective as a contractor, receiving the documents and then being able to evaluate those documents and come up with a price. Very simple process. Okay, now a very important part of the tender is what type of contract is involved. People don't often consider the effect that a contract can have on the tender. They look at the plans, they look at the specifications, they look at what's involved in the project. And as a final afterthought, sometimes they look at the contract. And honestly, that is probably the most important thing because it will affect the way you price or you submit your tender. And the first thing we need to understand is what type of project we are talking about. Are we looking at a commercial, residential, industrial building? Because as you're probably aware, most contractors focus or specialize in a particular area. I know I've at various times in my career, I've specialized in commercial, then fit out work, office fit out work, and then residential. Okay, so different areas require different skills. And just because a builder is very good at doing one area, let's say commercial, they may be very bad at doing residential. In fact, I remember the first time I went from building as a project manager, from building commercial work, retail, offices, cinemas. I left my company to start my own business, and I went into residential. And it was a very scary time for me, even though I had done lots of big work. Here I was doing a residential development, and because I hadn't done residential before, it was a new process. So we have to understand that when you're doing something that's out of your field of experience or out of your comfort zone, it's more challenging, and you need to get knowledge on that. And that could be knowledge by hiring the right people who have experience in that field, or you yourself gaining that experience. So understand that the type of building you're going to have is going to affect the whether you're capable of tendering, firstly. But in terms of the contract, certain contracts are geared for commercial work, certain contracts are geared for residential work. And each of those contracts will have different clauses and different things that we need to consider. Obviously, the size of the project as well, the complexity of the project. If it's a very, very complex project, it might be done on the basis of a cost plus contract because it's too difficult to price. And if the client insists on getting a fixed price for a very complex project, the building contractors will actually increase their margins, and the tender cost will be higher because there's higher risk involved with the complicated process. Okay, so we have to look at the complexity of the project, the familiarity with the contract by the builder. Okay, how familiar are you with these contracts? If, for instance, our client gives us a non-standard contract, which the client got his solicitors to make up, then we're not familiar with that at all. And it starts ringing alarm bells. What do we do here? What we have to make sure we understand every clause in this contract. So we give it to our solicitor to explain it for us. It starts making life a little bit more difficult. Whereas if we're dealing with a standard contract, Australian standard contract or an MBA contract, something that's standard, we're more comfortable with that. Okay, so again, the clauses within the contract need to be carefully examined, because if we remember, we're signing a contract means we are committing to do what we say, what we put our signature to. So we must understand exactly what we're doing. All right, so the tender procedure of a company. So we select a tender. If we have no work, we're going to be looking for lots of work to keep our people employed. So we may be looking in various areas for obtaining a tender. Now, what's the best way to get a tender? As I said earlier, it's a negotiated contract. And how do you get a negotiated contract? Through your clients, through your contacts, through people you know. That is the best way, obviously. Or they may have worked with you before and they like what you do, so they want to deal with you again. But selecting a tender is often a process that depends very much on what type of builder you are. If you're a well-known builder, jobs will come to you, okay? If you're not, then you have to start marketing yourself to receive jobs. You have to put yourself out there to try and get work. But once we have a tender, and let's say we have the ability to choose because we're becoming a more established builder, we could be a small builder, but we've got a good name, and people, word of mouth gets out there and they say, look, he's a good builder, let's get him to price our job. We can then have the benefit of pricing the type of jobs we want. And that might be, we like doing two-story homes, or we like doing commercial work, Or we like doing work that's only in the inner west or the eastern suburbs. So we can be selective about what jobs we want to price. The next thing we do is we allocate a tender team. Now, again, if you're a very small company, you might have one estimator, or you may be the estimator, as I've said to you before. If you're a larger organization, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 or more estimators. So you need to put a tender team together, and that will comprise of the estimator, okay, and maybe a larger organization would have a bid leader, somebody who takes care of the whole process to put the bid together, and he will be have estimators under him who will be doing the work. So you're going to put a team together. You need to review the documents that you've been sent. Okay, so you need to look at and make sure that you've got all the documentation. Make sure you've analyzed everything that has been given to you. There's nothing missing, because often you'll find that there might be errors, there might be things not very clear. So you need to review all the documents, make sure you've got everything. And then you go through the process of preparing the submission. Okay, your submission, your tender submission to give to the client. Now, this is an interesting process because it's not simply just creating and saying, okay, I've worked out my costs, here it is, right? You need to present your tender, and presenting your tender means putting it in the best way you can forward to your client. So you want it to stand out from other tenderers. How do you do that? Okay, it's in the presentation. It's in showing them, look, I have a brochure here of projects I've done that are similar to this. These are my people. I have a nice brochure of people, what their qualifications are, what their experience is. And I can tell you, in fact, because part of the work I do now is consultancy, and I've been used by clients to put together a tender for a government project most recently, where they basically wanted to present themselves as a little bit more professional than what they are. So they wanted to move up from the level that they were pricing on a government job up another level. And to do that, they had to present themselves a bit better. They had to present their people, okay? So they included me in there to make it look better as part of their team. And I was part of their team. So presenting your company in the best light is a very important part, along with the price. It's not just the price, okay? And especially when it comes to government jobs, they will insist on having all this little information that you may not be asked for when you're pricing, a simple house or something. It's very simple, but understand that presenting your company and you in a better light increases your chances. Construction program. The construction program is something that we need to do, because we need to understand how long is this project going to take us, how we're going to fit all the tasks of completing the project in there, okay? When we're going to need subcontractors. So we need to create our construction program. And then this, of course, will tie in with our progress claims. So it's a critical part of the whole process, the construction program. Then we compile and approve. So we compile all our submission documents, our pricing, everything we're going to present to the client, including our construction program. And we present it to our chief estimator, we'll present it to the bid leader, to the director, or again, if you are a small company, your estimator might present it to you and say, this is what I've created, let's go ahead with it. Can you sign off on it? Okay. And you submit the tender. Okay. Now, these are the documents that generally comprise a tender. So there's instructions. Often there's instructions are critical because it will tell you when you need to submit the tender by. There's a cutoff, a deadline, okay? How you're supposed to submit it, in what format you're supposed to submit it. It's no good if you don't follow the instructions. The first thing that somebody's going to look at, go, this is too complicated. They haven't followed the instructions. It leaves a very bad look for your company, because they say he's not professional. He doesn't even understand to follow the instructions correctly. So they put your tender aside. Okay, so it's important to follow the instructions. Read the instructions. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. We have a number of documents here, bill of quantities that you may be familiar with, which is a list of items, all the items, tasks, unit numbers of everything. It's wonderful to work with if you have a bill of quantities, because everybody is pricing the same thing, and you don't leave anything out because you have a bill of quantities. Resources that you have, of course, are very important. There might be nominated suppliers and subcontractors. What are they? They are basically suppliers or subcontractors that the client says, we want you to use these people for this project, because they may have used them before and we want to use them again. All right. So it's often the case with very specialized work that I remember doing a cinema a number of years ago, and the client wanted us to use a specific person to do the installation of the carpet. Why? Because they knew exactly how they wanted to be with that person, and they'd used him for many of their cinemas. So they wanted that person to be a nominated subcontractor. Specifications, drawings, of course, they're all, everybody understands what they are. Okay. All right. Now, one of the biggest part and a very important area of the whole tendering process is evaluating the risk. Okay. Because there is risk, understanding what sort of risks are involved. So we have risks within the contract. What happens if we don't, the breach of contract? It means we don't follow the contract exactly as we're supposed to. So that could be that we don't finish the project in time. Then we have liquidated damages. We have to pay the client for not finishing the job in time. Okay, so this comes back to our construction program, our schedule, the subcontractors we use. How reliable are they in terms of finishing the job? It's no good just getting the price. When we're tendering, we might ask our subcontractors to price the project, and we use the cheapest price. But might that get us in trouble? We have to be very careful, because we use the cheapest price, but they don't perform. And what happens then? They don't perform, we get in trouble from the client. Sure, we can try and pass our liquidated damages down to our subcontractor, but what if the liquidated damages are too high? Our subcontractor isn't in a position to pay them. So we must make sure that we have basically understood what can go wrong in terms of the contract. Now, circumstances such as delivery delays. Okay, if we order material from overseas, what happens when it doesn't come on time? Again, the client doesn't care about excuses. So we have to be very confident in the pricing that we use, the suppliers and the subcontractors that we use. We want to make sure that they don't let us down. Okay, so sometimes just to win a tender and use the lowest price is not your best option. We have to consider the reliability, and sometimes we have to use a higher price just to make sure. Disputes over payments, that could be an issue. Often it happens. It may happen between the client and the contractor. It may happen between the contractor and the subcontractors. So we need to be aware of all these things in the contract. All right. So I won't go through all the rest, but you can see that if there is no understanding of all and each and every item in the contract, we can leave ourselves open to having issues later on. So looking at the risk involved with a contract is very, very important. But including the whole project, we have various risks on the project. I won't go into all the risks involved in a construction project. I think that's being covered elsewhere in one of these other seminars, whether it's by myself or in the project management area. But you have matrices, a risk evaluation matrix, which basically, as you can see, is on the left-hand side, we have the likelihood, the consequences of something happening. What happens if? And on the right-hand side, the x-axis going across, we have the likelihood. So what's the chances of something happening and what are the consequences of something happening? A risk evaluation matrix is a very good tool to understand and prioritize our risks. Okay, so let's, for argument's sake, if I was to say I'm ordering a lift for my building and this lift is coming from overseas. This is a realistic example. I know somebody a contractor who basically wanted to do a favor for a friend who created a new lift company, and the lifts were coming from Spain, right? Now, the lifts were good quality, they were being used in Spain. However, this is the first time they were coming to Australia. Now, the builder gave his friend a contract, said, okay, I want the lift. They started to manufacture it. Then there were delays in Europe for some reason, in Spain. Then there was delays in shipping. Now, what ended up happening is the building was built. It was a 7-story building, was built, and the lifts weren't available. Okay, so the builder, I remember talking to the builder, he was very upset that he decided to allow this to happen, to give his friend the opportunity. And he's a friend, okay? So he gave him the opportunity, but it let him down ultimately. So what happens in this situation? What is the risk? The risk here was that you're using an unproven supplier, okay? Unproven supplier. So we have we know that it's not a rare chance that this will happen. It's possible that something's going to happen, or likely that something's going to happen, a delay. So then we look at what is the consequence of this. The consequence is major, isn't it? Because your project is delayed, you can't hand it over. So if you go across, you go major and likely, so it's in the red, severe. So we have to prioritize this risk. This is a bad situation to be in. All right. So we prioritize our risks and we address them from high priority down to low. But I'm not going to, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into too much detail about all these things, but I'm giving you an overview of things you need to consider when you're tendering. And if you're going to do that, you need to factor in all these risks, okay? And usually apply a contingency or change your rates in order to feel more comfortable with your submission. You should be comfortable. Okay, so the information necessary for preparing a tender. So these are, again, talking about what we need to prepare the tender. We have the various cost schedules, our costing from our suppliers, our subcontractors, our rates that we have inbuilt within our software that we use. We obviously have the plans, specifications, programs. Basically, all those things we've looked at just briefly before. But what about site investigation? That is a crucial one that we must do, especially when we're doing a new project. If we're doing a project and we don't do our site investigation, we may not discover all the things that could go wrong. For instance, we might price a drawing or a set of drawings, a project from the plan, but we don't bother to go out on site. What's going out on site going to give me? Well, it's going to give me a lot of information. It's going to give me information about site accessibility. Is it a very narrow street? Okay. Maybe I'm going to have difficulty getting trucks to go in there. Big problem, right? Okay. Because your costs now for delivering of materials are going to increase. You've got to factor in these costs. Are we going to have problems with services, such as, do we have overhead cables? Maybe, and I've done this before, we've had overhead cables that are going to be a problem because we have a crane or something. So we have to change those overhead cables to bring them underground. And that's going to cost a lot of money. Okay, so understanding that we need to go on site and see what the situation is. We go out on site, we can actually see what our neighbours, okay, New South Wales, are we building next to them, right? If we're building next to them, then we're going to be in for a lot of inspections, okay? So we have to be very careful. Are we building next to a hospital, an aged care centre, a school? So can you see that by understanding what is in your surrounding neighbourhood is very critical for when it comes time to pricing the job, okay? Right, how are our costs made up for the project? These are the different areas that we need to consider. We have across the top, labour, material, plant, subcontract costs. Of course, they are your total direct costs. Then we have on the other side, we have the indirect costs, which are your overheads, right? So you have office overheads, and then you have site overheads. So somehow we have to pay for our overheads as well on our projects. If I'm doing one job a year, all my overheads for my office need to be paid from that one job. Okay. If I'm doing 100 jobs a year, then I can split my office overheads over those 100 jobs. Okay. So it really comes down to how many projects I'm doing as to how much of an overhead I put on this job. Okay, and our site overheads are obviously things like our site staff labour costs, our setup costs, our amenities, those sorts of costs. Okay. Once we've added up our direct costs and our indirect costs, we allow for a profit margin to get our total project costs, and then we can submit that. Now, our profit margin will very much depend on how much work we have, how bad we want that job. Okay. If I don't have any work, and I've been in a situation where our company many years ago didn't have work. So what they did is they priced the job at cost. No margin, money on the variations, because there was a lot of variations in the project. So money was made, but more importantly, it kept, the 50, 60 people employed, right? So profit will vary. If we've got a lot of work, if we've got a lot of projects on, we're gonna increase our profit margin because we can't handle every single job. So we want to get the ones, and we want to get the ones that are a good profit margin. So it's going to vary. Okay. Okay, considerations. this is very important. So what are we going to consider when it comes to tendering? What's our company's strategy? Do we want to do this work? Is this work going to look good for our company? Is it a good image? Okay, right? So that's one of the things. What's our strategy? Do we want to get into this area? Do we want to expand? Who is the client? Very important, okay? Are we working for a client who's a gangster, right? Do we want to work for that person? What image is that going to give our company? Will he pay us? Okay. Have they got a good record of paying? Are they a slow payer? If you're working for the government, chances are you're going to get paid. Government pays. If you're working for a client, you've never worked to find out. Does he pay? Does he not pay? What's the probability of success? Well, that means how many people are pricing this job? Okay. Are there 20 builders pricing it? Well, if there's 20 builders pricing it, I wouldn't waste my time, right? Are there 2 builders pricing it? 4, 3, 4. Okay, you've got a good chance of success. So weighing up that information, understanding, finding out that information. Also, the resource requirement. What does that mean? Do I have the sufficient manpower to do the job? Do I have sufficient money? I might want to build the next casino, but I don't have the money, okay? I can't do the job. So understanding the resource requirements to do the job, or I may have a number of jobs on when this tender comes about. So, or when this project is to be built, and I won't have the manpower to do this. I won't have the management power to do this. So, and I don't want to bring somebody else into my company who I don't know to take on a job, because it may mean that this person I bring in may not be the right person, and I'm going to give myself a bad reputation if he doesn't do the job properly. Okay. Another important consideration is the time available for tender. Have I got enough time to tender? Have I been given enough time to tender? Did they think of me as a last resort? They go, oh, let's give this to him, and you've got 2 weeks to tender. Well, maybe this job normally would take me 1 month to put together a tender. So they're rushing me. And what happens when you are rushed? You're going to make mistakes. So how much time do I have to tender? Okay. Or how much do I want, if I have 2 estimators and they've got 10 jobs to price within the next month, maybe I don't have time to tender for this at all. And the contractual terms. If I don't like the contractual terms, the terms that are in the contract, maybe I don't even want to bother pricing this. If I see that it's a complicated contract that they've drawn up, I might say, you know what, I'm not interested in this project, and just say, forget about it. Okay. So this is the process of estimating. Okay, so you get an invite to tender, you determine whether you want to proceed with it or not, and then you go through the preparation of creating the tender. Who your, are all the documents there? Look at the site. Who are your contractors, suppliers? Get all the pricing you need. Okay, and then produce your estimate. Get a formal letter, submit it. Okay, very simple process. Okay, a very important aspect of tendering on more complicated projects especially is communication during the tender process. I've been involved in a number of them, and constantly you are on the phone, emails with the client, okay, because you have questions or something is not clear, and then the client organizes a briefing, a meeting for all the tenderers to go through. They go through and say, this is what we're doing here, this is what we expect. So communication with the client is very critical at this stage, as well as with your suppliers and subcontractors. Okay, so there may be tender bulletins and clarifications of what you need to do, so you know how to price it. Okay, evaluate and review completed tender document. So the first thing we have to do is obviously check everything. Okay, we must check how the client wants the tender presented, how he wants the costs broken up, and present it that way. Remember what I said about making sure you present it in a way that your client is happy. Otherwise, he'll look at it and go, he can't even present the tender in the right way. Why should I trust him with building my project? Okay, so check you have everything right. Check you have all the information. Check that the subcontractors and suppliers have covered everything when they are giving you their quotes. Okay. Make sure you estimate correctly by making sure that you, I've and cover every single area. I've been involved when I was in commercial construction. I was a project manager. I was involved in a project where the estimator forgot to include, even though he priced it, but he forgot to include it in his submission. He forgot the electrical section. We won the job. We were a very renowned company, so they didn't have any problems issuing us the job, even though we were much cheaper, because the estimate, fortunately, wasn't a big job. It was a refurbishment of a factory, industrial building, but there was still, a fair bit of electrical work. So we won the job, and when I went through to look at my scope of works after we won the project, the estimator gives you, the project manager, the file and says, okay, the job's yours now, go for it. And I looked and there was no allowance for electrical. I went back to the estimating department. I said, where's the electrical? And one of the estimators done the work. The chief estimator just signed off on it. He didn't pick it up either. So this is the check process that's supposed to happen, right? No one picked it up. And it comes to me and I have a job and we're behind the 8 ball before I even start, okay? So everything needs to be checked. Make sure you break up the estimates properly, review the pricing, okay? And make sure that you look at all the technical aspects of the job. And you're your estimators, your subcontractors, suppliers are able to provide all the technical aspects that you need, okay? Okay, top 5 tendering mistakes. Very simply, you could have errors, right? Typographical errors. You put 10,000 in instead of 100,000, okay? You've got to make sure you eliminate any basic silly errors, okay? Make sure you don't opt for quantity over quality. So in other words, you make sure that you provide the quality of the work that's required and the quality of the presentation, not just put a whole lot of things together and just because it looks very padded and very thick, if you were to print it out, it's good. No, you have to have quality, and that means presenting in the way that the client wants it, and that comes to poor presentation. You could have the best price, but if your presentation is very poor, you're not going to be considered for the job, because it's a reflection. Your presentation of your tender is a reflection of how you do business, whether you like it or not. Okay, so what do I say about presenting in the best way you can? Presenting your information, your tender, your information about you, your company. Okay, this not focusing on the buyer's needs, that should be client's needs. Okay, we focus on the client's needs. Sometimes we need to see, what does the client want? What is he achieving? What's the project? Is his most important consideration to make sure that we get the job done before time, before the time period elapses. If we can present our project to him sooner, perfect. So we give him a construction schedule that finishes, 1 month earlier than what he's asking for. That might be worth a lot of money to him. So it's better that we do that. And even if our price is slightly higher than somebody else's, they may opt for our tender. Always be in a position to ask about putting a tender together, especially if you're working in a smaller organization or any organization, doesn't really matter. If you don't have experience about something, ask, what is the best way to present this? Have I covered everything? Okay. Another important aspect is presenting alternative methods. Now, often we are in a position to say to the client, look, Mr. Client, I know your architects and engineers have proposed this method, but have you considered doing this? If you do this, you're going to shave 10% of your cost. We're going to bring this project in 10% cheaper for you. Now, if you propose that, it's not necessarily saying that the client's definitely going to go with you, but think about how good that looks to him about you, right? Proposing an alternative method. Straight away, they think, wow, this company's good. These people are good. They're trying to cut our costs down. Okay, so proposing alternative methods, proposing alternative materials. Okay, so that could be part of your presentation. So you have this cost, the way you want it, but we also have this cost if you want to do it a different way. Okay, errors. Okay, we don't need to talk about that. What quotations have you used? Subcontractors, suppliers. Are they good? Are they reliable? Like we said earlier. Margins and overheads. What are we putting on? How bad do we want this job? Am I doing the job for a client that I know will give me future work? So I will give him a really good price. I will reduce my margin down to 5% on this job because I want his price. I want his job, and then I want to be able to get future work from him. Fat or lean areas of the estimate. Where do we have areas in our estimate that have got a lot of fat, and we mean room, a lot of money. So if things, we can, take some money from there if we need to. And where are lean areas? Lean areas means there's not much money in this. If we know that this area is critical, we haven't priced it with a lot of room for play, for error. Okay. All right, now before we submit our tender, it needs to go to the appropriate person. And the final person in a larger organization is generally the directors. So it could go from the estimator, chief estimator, bid leader, directors. Okay, so you have to get endorsement or approval at each stage. Package is put together, prepared for these people to view. And as I said, the tender endorsement could involve the bid leader, estimator, general manager, directors. External consultants could be part of it. If we have external consultants who are specialists in a specific area that we're using on this project, okay? And we may use them to help us with our estimating. Remember, building companies often use external estimators as well, because their estimators may be too busy, or they don't rely on their estimators, they have external estimators. So that could be another source of a resource. Okay, a submission of tender. Well, you may be told how to submit your tender, in what format, but generally you're going to have a covering letter, which says, we're very grateful for the opportunity to be pricing the job. And then you have the tender form, the letter, timelines, your company profile, as I said earlier, very important to present that very nicely, and previous relevant projects, okay? Okay, now some tips. Make sure that your writing, your skills are good, yeah? If English isn't your first language, make sure you get it reviewed by someone who is very well versed in the written way submission, because it could make a difference. The presentation doesn't mean you're not capable of doing the work, but if your written language isn't good enough, it can throw the client off, okay? Understand the request from the client, what they want, how they want it presented. Okay. Learning that to go from receiving the documents to presenting the tender, making that process very efficient, okay? So it doesn't sit on tables or in computers without it being acted upon. Make sure the efficient, you give your team, your tendering team, if you have a team, training, give them the right tools, give them the right software, okay? This could expedite the whole process, allow them to create the tendering takeoffs much quicker. Many tools out there that they can use, and some might prefer certain tools over others. Talk to them, see what they need to make their job easier. Who are your competitors? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Okay, you might be pricing a job and you know you're pricing against somebody who has very high overheads. So that's their weaknesses. But at the same time, they have the strength of being a company that might have a good marketing, okay? But so you look at the company's strengths and weaknesses. What are your strengths? It might be that you've got very good reputation for delivering all your projects on time. That might be one of your major strengths. And that might be a critical aspect for the client, okay? Now, avoid the top 5 tendering mistakes that we said before, and ways of improving your success rates of tender submissions. Okay, so look at various ways of improving your success rate. And one of them might simply be communication, having very good communication, showing your client that, you know what, you're really keen and you're very thorough in what you do. Find little things that maybe other tenderers don't find. Errors that even consultants make. I found errors that consultants have made, and go back to the client and say, look, the consultant's made an error here. The tenderer is going to look at you, the client's going to look at you and go, wow, this guy's picking up errors from consultants. How good is that? Okay, we can use someone like this to do our project. Okay, a summary to assist winning tenders. Ensure that your client understands the area of expertise. So if I do specific areas, if I'm building a specific type of project all the time, the client's going to look at me and go, I'd like to use him because he just does these types of projects. He's got expertise in this area. Okay. Show them how you're going to deliver the project. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to start this way. We're going to go here, 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 and finish here. Show them your strengths. What are your strengths? Your experience, relevant experience. Your key people in your organization. What are their skills? That you have the resources to deliver. We have the financial capacity to deliver. We have the workers to deliver. We have the staff. We have the management. We have these systems in place. We have ISO qualifications. Okay, here are our referees. Bang, right? Give them all your referees. Okay, so finally, I'd like to thank very much the Chinese Building Association for doing this, and obviously they offer government-funded courses in building management, project management, leadership management, where you can learn a lot more about these things and also get qualifications, get certificate 4s, get diplomas, which can assist you. So thank you very much for attending. Thank